Well, today is Friday, March 21st in 2025, and we welcome you to the Chapter 49 podcast. Chapter 49 represents most IRS employees in the state of Indiana. My name is Larry Lannon. I'm a retiree and a communications volunteer for Chapter 49. We do thank you for joining us. We appreciate the fact you've taken time out of your busy schedule to join us and listen and watch what we have to offer you today. And we do have a lot to talk about. So let me welcome back in chapter president for chapter 49, Duncan Giles.
Thanks, Larry. It's always good to be here.
Well, let's give people a quick update. Here's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the return of the probationary employees and why some of them may not have been notified they can come back to work yet. We're going to talk about reduction in force, what that means. Um, there are some people who are using some rather strange methods of trying to figure out who should be let go first. We're going to talk about that, which we think, of course, is contrary to law. The return to office, what's IRS doing and what is NTEU doing as a result. We are doing a lot, and we want to update you on what's happening there. Reasonable accommodations for people returning to work or returning to the office. You've all been working. Return to the office. What's going on with reasonable accommodations? It's unfortunately going to take a while. And also, we want to talk about how the public is starting to notice the fact that the federal civil services, their attempts to decimate us as an agency, as a set of agencies, and as an institution, to be honest with you. And people are starting to notice. And we want to make sure that you let other people know what can be done as these services that we've always taken for granted kind of ran on automatic for years because there were federal employees working in the background, are all of a sudden either not working or not as available as they once were. I think we have plenty to talk about, Duncan, unfortunately. So let's
And
start.
all upbeat topics too.
Yeah, I wish we had. If you have one, please let me know, Duncan. I'm anxious to hear it. The probationary employees, we have talked about this before. We've received some very favorable decisions from the courts, so much so that the administration basically had to give up, cave, and said, okay, the probationary employees can return. They're not all failing to perform adequately. They finally realized that was a bogus argument to begin with, and the courts have pretty much called them out on that. But yet we're finding out that when notifications come, probationary employees who were let go are sometimes being notified through their government email to which they no longer have any access. I don't know, IRS government, maybe that's the government we know and love, but I guess the first thing we need to do is just let people know if you're a probationary employee and you are scheduled to come back to work or at least be put on administrative leave, if not back to work right away, and you have not been notified, what do you need to do now?
Yeah, that's one of those things where we just came across this because I was getting, many employees contact me saying they have been contacted, they have gotten an email. Others were saying, look, I've talked to a couple of my contemporaries, they've gotten an email. I haven't. My thing was, they're sending out certified letters to everybody. But if you haven't heard anything in a couple of days, contact your manager. Well, we've come to find out, and this is across the government, not just IRS, is that for a lot of people, I don't know whether they didn't have a home email address on record or they, what might have happened, but a lot of them were sending them to government email addresses, which of course the people haven't had access to since they were illegally terminated. So that makes it a little complicated for them to respond back to it if they've never gotten it. And, I would think that when they sent these out, the whole bunch of rejected email addresses should have been a clue to somebody.
Well, yeah, and so the bottom line is if you're a probationary employee, you have not resigned, then you should have been notified by now that you're at least going to be put on administrative leave. Some are being called back to work right away. Some that's just not possible to do all the processing in time to do that. In fact, I think one federal judge was pretty adamant that he had ordered people back to work, not to go on administrative leave. And hey, I don't know of anybody who who wants to be sitting at home when they should be working. They'd rather be working than sitting at home on an admin leave, really. So, if you're a probationary employee, you were let go, you have not resigned, and not officially resigned, then you need to contact your manager, get a hold of somebody in your organization, make sure they know, hey, I think I'm supposed to be called back or at least put on admin leave. I'm, eventually get to me, but I just kind of like to know now because certified mail takes time to get delivered.
Right. And part of the problem with, and I'm totally with the judge. Look, let's bring them back to work. The issue is, just to give IRS an example, we had over 6,000 people that probationary employees that we let go, close to 7,000. The problem occurs is once you are let go, you have to turn in certain government equipment, your cell phone, if you have one, your laptop, things of that nature, and your smart card ID badge. By securities regulations, they have to destroy those badges almost immediately. And as for those who aren't with the IRS that are watching or listening to this, if you don't have one of those smart cards and put it in your computer, you're basically dead in the water. You can't work anyway. And to reissue that number of cards is a pretty big task and is going to take a while. So I think that's part of the reason that a lot of these folks are on admin as opposed to coming back here. And we'll get to the other reason in one of our other topics. But yeah, that's, I'm just glad they're come back. They're able to get paychecks. They're able to get back pay. They're able to continue to have their insurance, so there are good things. And I'm fielding a lot of questions from people. Should I stay? If I have found another job, should I stay with that one or go back, or what should I do? And everybody's situation is different. Everybody's is different. As I've been telling people, you have to do what's best for you and your family. And that's going to be a different choice for everyone.
My heart goes out to some people because we received a private message on our Facebook page recently from an employee who was working remotely and lives a long way from where their office would be, and had in fact resigned, and now had this person not resigned, might have been able to maybe get a reasonable accommodation or something. So I think that it's really sad because this goes back to something Doreen Greenwald told us in a podcast we had recently with her, that when you resign and you make that resignation official, you do lose all your rights. So I felt terrible. This person, what can you do for us? And I just had to be honest. Once that resignation is official, you've separated from the government, and there's just nothing we can do for you legally to represent you or to try to look out for your best interests. So, as Duncan said, everybody's situation is different, but make your own decision based on your own personal situation. Anything to add to this return on probationary employees, Duncan?
No, I'm just glad they're going to that they're on the rolls for however long they're on the rolls for. Because I talked to a lot of these people, had a meeting with had a couple of decent managers who shall remain nameless that are like, we're not allowed to tell them anything. We think that you'd be able to give them some information. And this was several days before they were let go. And I basically told them the straight scoop, and it was painful. But I wanted to make sure that they were aware of what was coming. And so I'm very glad to see some of those folks are now back on the payroll. And, I'm hoping, I'm not counting on it, but I'm really hoping that some of them can come back and be members of the service or whatever government agency that they were working for, that you may be watching this outside the IRS. Because all of these government agencies, and God knows the IRS included, we need new blood. We need newer people in here. We've got too much work and too few people. We need the people in here. And, basically saying, okay, the newest people who might have different ideas, they're out the first. And it was really tough. So I'm glad that we've got the judges have really taken a close look at this, realized there was no performance. It was an illegal RIF, and brought them back.
Well, speaking of RIFs, we're going to talk about that next. RIF is reduction in force. And just to go over what we've talked about in past podcasts, in case you didn't, you're watching or listening for the first time or missed a few, we did go into some detail. Even an overview has to be pretty detailed when you're talking about the rules over a RIF. They're in the law, they're in our contracts. Unfortunately, we're hearing very sad tales that people in the administration want to ignore the RIF contract provisions and even the law that governs reduction in force. And the law is very clear on how this is going to be done. It's seniority, it's veterans preference, it's bump and retreat. It's a complex thing, but it's for the most part seniority, veterans preference, and when you're RIF, you can move back to a lower graded job and bump somebody else up. And then they go into a bump and retreat. It's like a jigsaw puzzle to figure out how to do a RIF. Um, what I saw just before we started recording this was an interesting article from one of the economic websites. They were looking back to what was the largest, I should say, just layoff in the private sector. The largest layoff they could find in recent history of the private sector, I think, was 1993. I think it was IBM that let 60,000 people go. Well, if the Doge and the Trump people get their way in what they're trying to do, a whole lot more than 60,000 people are going to be let go by the federal government. And economists are just now beginning to get their arms around the issue of what is this going to do to the economy? It's not just the federal employees who will be let go, it's the contractors that also will have to let people go. This can multiply in ways that people are not even equipped to quantify at this point.
Yeah,
So, we've been hearing a lot about reduction in force. I've heard a crazy idea from some people in the administration that surfaced in the media. Again, I want to differentiate what we know for sure and what our media reports. There's a media report out there that there are people in the administration who want to just ignore the law and contracts on reduction in force and just talk about who's required to work in a shutdown and just let everybody else go, which is one of the craziest things I have ever heard. But we are hearing a lot of crazy things these days. So, Duncan, with that as kind of a background, where are we on RIF reduction in force at the IRS and the federal government?
Yeah, and so many of your points are well taken. The ripples from this are just going to be unbelievably bad if they go through with what they're looking to do. The agencies had to have their plans to OPM, their general plans, by March 13th, so just a few days ago. So a week or so ago. Then by around a month from that date, around early to mid-April, they've got to have their specified plans into OPM. So I don't know if OPM is coming back with notes, so to speak, or something of that nature. We've seen some reports in the press on how many they're going to do from what. One of the things is it includes all the folks who are probationary who are illegally terminated. So that's why I was talking about, I don't know how long those folks are going to have their jobs, because I think that the vast majority, if not all of them, will probably be going back out in a RIF. I hate to say that and I hate to see it, but I would, that's just logically what you want to do. When you touched on, a perfect example is, well, if there's a shutdown, who's essential? Well, let's just take call site employees just for those. Okay, if it's non-filing season, they're not declared essential because, I've been through shutdowns where they've said, okay, we're going to shut down. We're not calling you in at the start here. If it is filing season, you are essential. So does that mean that CSRs are only partially essential? That would make no sense. They have to do it. There are contract provisions, as you mentioned as well. There are laws, and it gets incredibly complex, and you have to keep reworking and keep reworking and keep reworking. And we are very afraid that the administration is not going to do that as they should, and also not take into consideration things like veterans' preferences that they have to by law. So it's a we're very wary right now of what could be coming down the road.
Yeah, and I think that we are going to keep a close eye on this. And of course, if the law, and then of course contracts as well, but just to start with, if the law is not followed, we, along with other government unions, employee unions, and nonprofits who think like us, we're all going to be back in court again.
Yeah,
And the judges, I don't think the judges are going to put up with this based on what we have seen so far. So whether they'll stop it in its tracks, we just don't know. It has happened. Well, with probationary employees, it did happen. It took a few weeks, but that's pretty fast by federal
yeah,
district judge
yep,
standards for that to happen. So we'll be back in court again if they are going to pursue a situation with a RIF that is not consistent with the law. And then, of course, we think our contract should also be enforced. But just to start off with, the law needs to be enforced as well. And I think the
yeah,
judges will require any government agency or the White House to eventually do that. But what damage will be done in the meantime?
yeah.
So
There,
there's a lot of moving parts here. Anything on RIF you want to talk about
yeah,
before we
I
move
do want
on?
to talk about where people have gone. Well, are they going to offer VISIP, which is voluntary separation incentive payment? Because I can get up to $25,000 before taxes. That would help tide me over. People have to remember that's based on what you would get for severance pay if they offer that, and that is 1 week of pay for every year you've been here for the first 10 years, 2 weeks if you've been here for every year after 10. So if you've only been here 5 years, you'd be looking at 5 weeks, not $25,000 max. It can't be exceeding 25,000, but you'd be looking at 5 weeks of pay. So I want people to be, ready for that. We don't know if they are going to offer Vera. We would think they would. We would think that they would, or Visa. We will hopefully they're going to offer Vera as well, and that's again where if you have at least 20 years and 50 years old, or 25 years with any age, that you could retire. Part of the problem with some of that is when you get into some of the retirement aspects. I had a question from a member this week, and it broke both our hearts when I had to tell them, because if you can retire at your minimum retirement age plus 10, and that's usually mid to late 50s, then that's what you would qualify for. You wouldn't get any severance. So there would be no severance. So if they wouldn't offer VISA, they wouldn't get severance, and they've been here 15 years, and they're in their mid 50s, they wouldn't qualify for retirement. They wouldn't be able to keep, they would qualify for a much smaller pension than they would normally if they would continue to work. And so there are a lot of moving parts to this that we want people to make sure that they research very well, because when this comes down, it shouldn't happen quickly. There should be a lot of time for people to plan. But as we've seen, a lot of times there is not until the courts step in and correct it. So before then, we want to make sure that people are thinking about these things in case it is moving rather rapidly. I've seen some government agencies that have said, okay, if you want Vera or if you want VISA, you've got 2 days to decide. Now, it hasn't happened in the IRS, but I've seen it happen in other agencies right now. And A, that's just wrong. But B, we want people to be prepared and already know. It's sort of like looking at a menu before you go to a restaurant. Okay, this looks pretty good. This is what I think I'm going to want. So you have that idea. You have pre-planning, so you kind of know if a worst case scenario happens, what am I looking at? And with all that said, NTU is going to be there the entire way, just as we've been for the folks who are probationary. We're going to be doing the same way with RIF. I can tell you that I know National NTU has been talking to IRS, has sent IRS, basically letters saying you'd better do this correctly. I mean, literally a shot across the bow. And I would imagine that any judge who is going to take a look at this is going to say, okay, IRS or Treasury, you were told you need to do this according to the law. You were told that there are contract provisions that you need to do. Why did you basically ignore them? You can't say you weren't aware of them. You basically ignored them. And I would think that would be a big factor in a legal proceeding. So there are a lot of things going on. NTU is right in the middle of it, trying to make sure that we can limit the damage as much as possible legally and doing everything that we can. But I feel there is going to be some short and long-term pain.
Well, Duncan, the other part of this is that normally what you would advise people to do in a situation like this is to go to the personnel office. Well, if you've got if you've got 2 days to make a decision, nobody in the personnel office is going to be available to talk to you. Probably not for 2 months in some cases. And even if you're trying to get general advice now, those people are doing the best they can, but they're not fully staffed either. So they're going to have. So I know some people have been frustrated. I've talked to you, and we're going to do the best we can to dig into the facts that you have, and everybody's facts may be a little bit different. But you talked about NTU and what we're doing. Let's move on to from reduction in force to return to office. I just saw yesterday that after the Social Security Administration had basically assured everybody at SSA that they're going to adhere to all the contract provisions. Like a few days later, they're ordering everybody back into the office. They've got telework contract provisions with their union. It's not us, but it's another union. But nonetheless, they do have a contract on telework, which is being ignored despite the fact the management there said they were going to adhere to the contract. So we have got that problem now at IRS. We've got return to office going on. NTEU is doing everything we can, and we'd love to just get this stopped right today. But the law is what it is. The process is what it is. And if we go to a court, the first thing the judge is going to ask NTEU is, did you use your internal process first? And so we have to do that to have standing to get into court, to even try to ask for something like an injunction. So we want to let everybody know NTU is working as quickly as we can, as well as we can. But Duncan, dive a little bit more into this.
Yeah, and you encapsulated it beautifully, Larry. Thank you. We first have to file a national grievance to go to the IRS to basically say, hey, look, you're not following the contract. We have a telework agreement. It hasn't been renegotiated. You've basically just said, screw it, we're going to go forward with this. No, you can't do that. So we have to have a meeting and get that over with so the IRS can give us, basically directed from Treasury, can give us whatever BS excuse they're going to give and not, uphold the grievance. Then we have to go to Merit System Protection Board and make our same case there. And then if that doesn't turn out well, then we can go to the courts and do that. And I've heard people say, well, how long is this going to take? A couple of weeks? And no, it's not going to take a couple of weeks, because I can imagine that the Department of Treasury and the administration is going to drag their feet as much as possible, fight this tooth and nail for everything that they've got for whatever reason, because as we all know, working from home is study after study after study is talking about, if you're teleworking, you're more productive. You get more done. But for whatever reason, they've decided they don't like that. I'm sorry that offices are vacant. We've been working on rent reductions because we've had this and it's been working. So it's not going to be a short-term project. And I know there are an awful lot of people that are a long way from their post of duty. And, the problems that come in with their places, right now we have a post of duty in the state of Indiana where we literally do not have enough space for all of our employees to sit in. And that is all over the country as well. And then we've got places, well, why are we sitting here instead of sitting over here with the rest of us? And that was done by national IRS. That was not done locally. So the local people who would know the situations, who would be able to draw up maps and say, okay, this is where this should be, this is where this group should be, were basically ignored. We're hoping that once the dust settles on this, we're going to be able to try and work some moves within offices or to offices that are closer to people to try and remedy some of this. but that's going to be, again, a while to do that. And so people are like, why can't we just strike? We don't want to go back to the office. Why can't we just strike? It is against federal law for federal employees to strike. This did not work out well. The best example of this is when a organization called PATCO, which represented air traffic controllers in the Reagan administration, said they were going to strike. And the Reagan administration basically said, boop, you're all gone. We're firing everybody, because legally they could do that if there was a strike. So we can't strike. As much as we'd like to do something like that, we cannot legally do it. We have to follow the procedures. We have to do what we need to do and then comply and then grieve. And that's exactly what we're doing. We're going according to what the law and the contract provisions are. We can't help if the other parties are not doing that. We're going to do this the right way, and that way we can make sure we prevail. Unfortunately, it takes longer than anyone would like, but we will eventually prevail in this.
Yeah, let me say something about this idea of a strike, because the laws are really draconian on this. I mean, you and I can't even talk about the possibility of a strike, and we're not. Just to make it
Right.
real clear, we are
Right.
in no way saying anybody should strike,
Yep.
and it's illegal for a union or even a group of employees to talk about that.
Yep.
So the law is very clear. We do not think that is the way to go. The way to go is to use the legal process that is there. We want to adhere to the law. We are encouraging and demanding that people do follow the law. That would include the management, by the way. That would include the
There you
administration
go.
following the law. But we do believe you as federal employees and we as unions should follow the law. And we want to make it very clear we are adhering to that. That's what we are telling people. We're using the legal process, and it's going to take longer than we want, but we're going to follow the law even if others are not, in our view, anyway. That's our allegation. Uh, and something else that comes into play here, a lot of people are saying, well, okay, if I cannot really, in any reasonable way, come back to the office, can I ask for a reasonable accommodation to stay on telework? So, Duncan, what's the answer to that?
You absolutely can. If you have a specific condition or illness or situation that falls under the reasonable accommodation guidelines, you can absolutely ask for one. Now, until a reasonable accommodation is granted, and this is an important piece that people don't seem to realize, until accommodation is granted, you don't have a reasonable accommodation. If you don't have something in writing saying management and I agreed to do this with the intermediary being a reasonable accommodation coordinator, if that's not in writing, you do not have a reasonable accommodation. And from what we're hearing and seeing, reasonable accommodations right now, if it's more than 2 weeks, if a reasonable accommodation is going to last more than 2 weeks, it has to go up to the Assistant Secretary of Treasury. And I'm betting that's sort of like the going to be like the suggestion box on the show The Office, where it basically just sat there and there was nothing in it because they don't even look at it. So you've got that issue going. You've got people who want reasonable accommodations for just about everything. One of the things that I see is, people saying, well, I live too far away, so I don't want to drive. I totally get that, totally understand it. That is not something that a reasonable accommodation is going to be done for. Child care is not going to be considered a reasonable accommodation. They're going to tell you, okay, well, maybe change your hours a little bit, maybe go to 410s or something of that nature where, you can work your hours a little bit more or a little bit differently. So, I mean, it has to fall under the conditions for reasonable accommodations. If you have one, though, I urge you to fill it out, but don't be thinking you're going to get a quick long-term resolution on this, because everything we're seeing is taking a long time.
So just to be aware, there are a couple of important takeaways. Number one is that if you ask for a reasonable accommodation, it's going to take a while, as you just said, and you cannot enforce a reasonable accommodation in the interim. So you can't have it. We're finding out that there are people with extreme situations, life-threatening diseases, who still want to work It's taken them 2 or 3 weeks to get a ruling on that. And you would think you could get that very quickly. That's considered a quick decision now, even the most extreme cases.
Yep.
So just be aware of that. It's not the way the system should work. And I do think for the services credit, they are pouring more resources into people to look at these. They're trying to make these decisions more quickly, but there's only so much you can do with the people you have. The final issue we want to talk about, Duncan, has to do with what we're seeing. The public is beginning to understand what's going on. Seeing demonstrations, people massing in front of congressional offices, other offices. I mean, people are beginning to push back on this whole issue of what's happening with the federal government. And when you start getting rid of people, whichever way they want to do it, legally or illegally, look at this. We just had a tornado outbreak in Indiana and surrounding areas. You know, if you want warning of a possibility of a tornado hitting your area, who do you depend on? The National Oceanic, how can I, Ocean, NOAA,
Yeah.
Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. It's this, if I can say it right, it's the organization that has the National Weather Service as part of it. And the National Weather Service forecasters, they are the ones that issue tornado warnings. Nobody else is authorized to do that, or tornado watches to let you know a large area may have an outbreak. So, and by the way, people say, well, why can't private weather forecasting services take the place of the National Weather Service? Well, there's a problem with that because the National Weather Service collects all of the raw data, the scientific data, all of these private services use to make their forecasts. So they don't have the money to go out there and do that. One of the key things that the National Weather Service does is put weather balloons up to try to get an idea what the atmosphere is like up higher. That's the only way you can do that. Well, we just understand that just yesterday I read that the National Weather Service, because of their employee cutbacks, are not able to put those weather balloons up every day in every location. So we're already beginning to see the impact that cutting back federal employees can have on something as basic as knowing whether a tornado is hitting your home or on the way to your home. Look at veterans. If you want to need service from a veterans hospital or VA benefits, DOJ is trying to cut back the Veterans Administration. When he talked about Social Security and they want to close, they say, well, we're going to make sure you're a citizen, so you have to come in person. But of course, we're also closing the offices, and you cannot do that over the phone anymore. And they're still getting rid of phone people. So they want it done here, but you don't have the authorization to do it there. And of course, we all know about IRS service people want, and how that's never going to work if people need help. It's going to take human beings to do it. You know, technology can do some of this, but it cannot do all of it. So, Duncan, I think what we're going to encourage people to do is say, look, don't just do this yourself or encourage your family members to do it. We should do that. Talk to people in your local community. I think I mentioned this before. If there's going to be a taxpayer assistance center closed in your community, don't just talk to your family or friends. Talk to the civic organizations, the government people. They can pressure members of Congress and senators to make sure this doesn't happen. It's going to take the public and other people related to the public to stop some of this. So, Duncan, I think the message I would give, and I hope I'd like to get your take on this, why people should not just contact their congressional offices and contact their senators. They should be letting other people know outside their family and friend circle that this is bad for your local community. You need to work against this.
Yeah, absolutely. You need to, yeah, everybody needs to contact their congressperson and their senators. That's a given. That's at this point, that's just a given. Whether they're for these cuts, whether they're against these cuts, it needs to be recorded. So by all means, do that. Encourage your family and friends. But, we're seeing rallies and, you see things in the press now on TV where people who aren't federal employees, who realize, as you said, some of these cuts and how they're going to impact things are saying, wait, we need to stop this, slow it down, figure out, how we can do this. And we've got to work together and push forward. If you're not an NTU member, you should be joining because they have great information that comes out. Also things on how to help get this word out, things of that nature. So we're all in this together. When I say all, I'm talking about everybody. because this just doesn't involve federal employees. It involves the contractors, and then it involves the ripples, the restaurants where people eat, the businesses that they use. It's all a combination, and it's not going anywhere good. So we want to make sure that you get the word out, support it, do what you can out there. That's what we need to do.
And with that, Duncan Childs, your final comment.
My final comment is, there are certain parts of the administration who basically have said, we want federal employees to get up in the morning and feel horrible. We don't want them to come in. We basically want to beat them down and make them the villains. Let me tell you something, folks. You're not the villains. Federal employees are the heroes. You're doing the unsung work that needs to be done out there. Whether you're in the National Park Service, whether you're fighting fires, whether you're answering taxpayers' questions, be it from IRS, Social Security, anything that folks can see, or if you're doing infrastructure things that the country absolutely needs. I couldn't be prouder of my fellow federal employees who do the job day in and day out, especially under this pressure. I just want you to know that again, as we talked about the public is becoming more and more appreciative. I know the good work that everybody out there does. I see it every day. And I'm in a building with a lot of different government agencies that are doing the right things, that are, making sure their butts are here, or, teleworking if they still can, to help the American taxpayer, help the public do what needs to be done. So don't ever feel you're not appreciated. Don't ever feel you're the villain, because, folks, you are the heroes, and I am proud to be part of you.
Well, that's well said, Duncan. Thank you very much. That's an important message, and I think you articulated that very well. My final comment is, I studied political science as a major in college. And one thing I studied as part of that was bureaucracy. And this word bureaucracy has come up to be an evil word in some circles. It kind of ties into what you just said. But if you have to have bureaucracy if you're going to have a large organization of any kind. The biggest corporations in America are bureaucracies. ExxonMobil is a huge bureaucracy. General Motors is a huge bureaucracy. Go on down the line. Uh, there's some large nonprofit organizations that have large bureaucracies. State government is a large bureaucracy in most states. So if you don't have bureaucracy, you don't have a way to function. So the question is, how do you make a bureaucracy a functional working entity? And Duncan, you and I have worked along. I can't even count the number of committees I've been on, the number of incentives I've put in. I mean, I put in suggestions, got awards for them, because I was always interested in making my government, for which I work and for which I pay taxes and for which I depend upon, to be a functioning bureaucracy that serves the people and serves the function that it's supposed to serve. So bureaucracy, I would hope that people understand what bureaucracy is. It's people, just like Duncan said, coming into work every day, doing that work. My father worked for the Department of Defense for almost his entire working life. And for a good part of his working at the Department of Defense, he had access to classified information. And there were times I could tell something was bothering him. He knew some very difficult things were going on in the world. He couldn't tell any of us, and he couldn't even tell my mom what actually was happening. But he knew that there were really bad things happening in the world, and that the United States was working on it. So those are the people that are working in a bureaucracy. And just remember, when people say, I just want to cut government, that's what you're doing. You're cutting the National Weather Service. You're cutting the Veterans Administration and their hospitals. You're cutting the Social Security Administration, the Medicare program. That's what you're doing. People don't understand that federal employees have been keeping these sorts of programs on automatic pilot as far as the public is concerned, but it's really not, because
Yep.
all of us who work in that bureaucracy are making it work. And just at the point that Duncan just made, you know, um, people are beginning to notice that when you just start cutting federal employees for no good reason, these programs are no longer an automatic pilot. And what we've taken for granted is no longer there. So let's not look at bureaucracy as some kind of evil word. It's a necessary thing to have any kind of large organization, whether it's private sector or public sector. Let's make it work. And I think that the people with whom I've worked do that. Duncan, I remember being a manager when we were under tight financial situations. My staff and I, we worked hard at saving money, cutting corners. We were finding ways to try to make our budget stretch further. These are the kind of people we are that work for the federal government. So that is my speech. Bureaucracy is not a bad thing. It is human beings and it's people trying to make work what we take for granted every day. Just keep that in mind when you find people who are working hard to keep the government functioning, because we all depend on that government to take care of the various things that the government does, like Social Security, Medicare, our defense. I mean, I could go all the way down the line. Duncan Giles, thank you very much. And thank you so much for watching and listening. This is the Chapter 49 podcast. If all goes well, we will return next week. In the meantime, please be safe and be kind.